Hello and welcome to our video series on Creo 2 update training. In this video we want to go through and look at how to deal with features that fail to regenerate. Now in the previous versions of the software you would go through and use what they called the resolve mode. And so now in Creo 2 they've introduced the no resolve mode to deal with feature failure. Now this is actually not new to Creo. The first version of the software that had the no resolve mode was Wildfire 5. So if you're coming to Creo from Wildfire 5, you're probably familiar with this already. If you're coming from Wildfire 4 or any earlier version, this will be brand new. Now to deal with the failure was probably the most frustrating part about Pro Engineer, especially for the new user. They would go into the resolve mode and it wasn't very user friendly to try and go through and take corrective action to solve the problem. The resolve mode had several issues. One is you really couldn't tell how many features you caused to fail. So if you modify something and cause other things to fail, it would regenerate up to the first failing feature and it would stop. But I couldn't tell if I caused one thing to fail, did I cause 10 things to fail, or 100. And so it's very difficult to determine, do I want to tackle this problem or just undo and go back. Also with the resolve mode, once you got into it and started to take corrective action, there was no way to undo and back out. If you wanted to get out, you got in over your head, you basically had to go through and just delete everything or suppress it and then erase that model and re-retrieve it and start all over again. And also you couldn't save the model once a failure occurred, and so if I caused the failure at the end of the day and I want to go home, I couldn't save it. I had to solve the problem right now. And then on top of that, they went through and used the old menu-driven system on the right. And so they went back to the pre-Wildfire interface for going through and dealing with the failures. And so if you weren't a long-time user of Pro Engineer or very experienced, it was very difficult to navigate through those menus to get to where you wanted to go. So this new no resolve mode has been created to deal with those problems. Now, one thing to keep in mind, you can go back and use the old resolve mode if you want. If you're comfortable with that, you can go through and turn that on and use that if you want. Now, let's take a quick look at this model here. I'm going to go through and cause some failures in it and then solve those problems. Now again, to go through and analyze my model, if I just come up here to Tools really quickly and then go to my model player, again I'm just going to rewind this back to the beginning. Now remember, my first four features here are just 3 datum planes and a coordinate system, which I currently have turned off so I don't see those. But there's my first base block, and then on top of that I just went through and made another extrusion. I then went through and made an extruded cut. I've now got again a chamfer on the corner, and then went through and made an extruded cut, the T shape that you see there. Came back and made another extruded cut. Now if I come over here and show my dimensions, this is one of the features that I'm going to have failed to regenerate. So you can see I've gone through and dimensioned off the bottom of the T, and I'm going to go through and update that T-shaped cut to a different shape, and so this feature will fail. And then also you can see if I play forward again, there's some chamfers on the edges of that T-shaped cut, which will also fail, and I'll solve. And then at the end again, I've got a hole and then another cut at the bottom. So a relatively simple part, but I'm going to go through and make some changes then and have some failures that I'll need to update. Now I'm just going to finish this and close that model player dialog box. Now before you go through and change the model, you probably want to come over here and just check, what do you have as your solving method if you do go into failure. And so I can check that if I come over here under the Regenerate drop down here and I go to the Regeneration Manager. And when I do that, I'm just going to say, okay, I currently don't have any failures, but if I did have failing features inside the part, this Regeneration Manager would list them out. But up above here under Preferences, this is where I can go for feature handling. So you can see I currently have the new no resolve mode turned on. But if you wanted to go through and use the resolve mode, you could add the check mark to that. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to go through and start to make some changes to this T-shaped cut. So again, I'm going to go through and pick on that, and I'm just going to right click here and come over here and say Edit Definition. And so again, there's my shape. I'm going to right click and say Edit the Internal Sketch. And what I want to do is I want to delete the bottom of the T and turn this into just a rectangle. So again, I'll come over here and use my delete segment command and delete these pieces that I no longer need. And then you'll notice it does give me a warning that there's some entities that are referencing these things that I'm deleting. So that's kind of a clue that I'm going to have a failure here when I'm done. So I'm going to delete those pieces. I'm just going to come up here and use my corner command to retrim this now into a rectangle. So that's my new updated shape for the cut. So again, I'll just say done here to get out of the sketcher. There's the new shape. And so now when I hit the green check mark to complete this change, this is where now I start to get the failure. Now notice it does go through and bring up a menu down below and says I've caused something to fail. And if you come over here and look in your model tree, you can see the two features that fail, extrude number 5 and chamfer number 2, they turn red. So I can see I've caused two things to fail, whereas with the resolve mode, I would have had no idea how many things I caused to fail. And then down below, I can come down and say OK, and I can accept what I see on the screen, or I could say cancel, and I could undo everything. So I'm actually going to come down below here and say OK and accept. Now, even by saying OK, I can still go through and undo all these things if I want later on. And then you'll also notice down below there is the big red dot down here. That also shows me that I currently have something failing inside the part. And if you were to pick on that dot, you could actually go through and bring up the Regeneration Manager. And it really is just a duplicate of your model tree, but you'll notice it starts at the first failing feature. It leaves all the other features in front of that off. Now, I don't really need to use that, so I'm going to come down here and cancel that and remove that from the screen. Okay, so I've got a failure. Now, you'll notice I can see, of course, what fails over here in red. And if I come up here now and say File, you'll notice I can actually come over here and save the model. And so if I was to say OK, it will give me a warning here that you're saving this with failed features inside. But it won't prevent me from doing that. Now, one thing keep in mind, if you do have models with failed features inside that you save, you cannot check these items in to Windchill. So it will not let you upload or check them in if you're using that as your data manager. So eventually you are going to have to solve all these problems, but you don't have to do it right now. Now the other thing to be careful about, if you do save the model, that will prevent you from undoing back through the save. But it is possible. So I'm going to cancel that. I really don't want to save because I'm going to solve these problems right now. Now, another advantage of this new no resolve mode is you can actually deal with the failures in any order. With the resolve mode, you always had to work from the top down. So I could actually come over here and solve this chamfer problem first if I wanted to. Now, you typically do want to work from the top down because I may go through and solve the lower problems when I fix the earlier ones. Now, I'm going to come over here to chamfer number 2, just right click on it. And again, to solve most problems, remember, you just come down and say Edit Definition. I want to edit the definition of this particular chamfer. Now you can see I've got the word sets over here in red, so that means there's some problems underneath there. So I'm going to go through and pick on that, and I can actually see, if I scroll down here, I've got some missing references. Now to see this better, I'm going to bring up my detail panel over here on the side, and so you can see you can find some of the edges, but these ones with the red dot, those are the ones that I deleted. So to fix this problem for the chamfer, I'm simply going to come over here and remove these edges from the list. So now I've updated my edges that I want to be chamfered, and so you can see now I see the chamfer on the screen, so everything's fine for that. So I can just come over here and say done, and now I've gone through and solved my first problem. But you'll also notice it came back and gave me a message down below. I've still got problems. So again, I still have the red dot down below, and I still have the extrude number 5 in red. So again, now I can go through and deal with that next problem though. So again, I'm going to pick on extrude number 5. I'm going to right click again and then just come down here again and say Edit Definition again. And then when I go to Edit Definition, notice I can't go through and see the orange outline of this shape. And so that means there's something wrong with it. So again, I'm going to right click here and say Edit the Internal Sketch and then take a look at that. And if I look, this is where it now comes back and says I've got missing references. So you can see I've got a reference missing there and a reference missing there that creates the two locating dimensions. That's what I deleted on the bottom of the T. So I'm going to come over here and just delete these references. Okay, I don't want that one. I don't want that one since they're gone. And I'm just going to add 2 new dimension references. Okay, so to locate my cut up and down, I'm going to use this top surface right here as my first reference. To locate left or right, I'm going to go through and use that left face. So by adding those 2 references, the computer will now build 2 new dimensions from there. So it's really just a matter of going back and then redimensioning that particular cut. Now once I've done that, I've solved the problem. So again, I can come up here and say done. Now you can see it's orange, so everything's all right. And I can now just come over here and say done. And I've completed then going through and updating those 2 features that failed. So you can see I stayed in the standard work environment. It was really easy to do. Now also, if I get to this point and decide, well, that's wrong, I can still undo. Notice the undo button here. I can undo all the way back to the very beginning if I want. So even if you do start to solve something and decide you want to back up, that is always going to be available to you. Whereas in the past, with that resolve mode, you were always locked in once you tried to go through and solve a problem to solving them all.